Some films were never meant to be accepted. They were rejected immediately. Pulled from theaters, banned across countries, hidden from audiences who were told they were too dangerous to watch. Yet those same films refused to disappear. They survived through whispers and underground screenings, and filmmakers like Quentin Tarantino kept their legacy alive. What you are about to see is not just a list, it is a descent into cinema that challenged everything. Number 15. Switchblade Sisters, 1975. There is something unsettling about how innocence collapses in this film. It begins like a teenage rebellion fantasy, a group of girls forming a gang, claiming territory, writing their own rules. But almost immediately the tone shifts. Control turns into cruelty. Loyalty turns into paranoia. And what looked like empowerment slowly mutates into something darker. This is not just a grindhouse curiosity. This is a blueprint for chaos. Quentin Tarantino saw something most people missed. He did not just admire it. He resurrected it. Through his Rolling Thunder label, he brought it back to audiences who were never supposed to see it again. That alone tells you how dangerous its energy felt. The film faced heavy censorship in several markets, not because of gore alone, but because of its raw depiction of power shifting between young women. It does not comfort you. It traps you inside a social experiment where trust dies quickly. Every scene feels like it could explode, and when it does, it is not satisfying. It is cold. It is sudden. It leaves damage behind. What makes this film unforgettable is not the violence. It is the way it builds tension without warning. You are never ahead of it. You are always catching up, and that is exactly why it still feels alive today. Number 14. Rolling Thunder, 1977. Revenge films usually promise catharsis. This one denies it. From the first frame, there is a quiet tension that refuses to release. A war veteran returns home expecting peace. What he finds instead is emptiness, disconnection, a life that moved on without him. And then something worse happens, something that cannot be undone. Quentin Tarantino has often pointed to this film as a defining influence. You can see it in the way violence is treated, not as spectacle, not as entertainment, but as something inevitable, something that builds slowly like pressure inside a sealed room. The film was controversial upon release. Its brutality was not exaggerated, it was precise, clinical. The violence lands without music guiding your emotions. That silence is what disturbed audiences. It made everything feel real. Too real for comfort, too real for easy consumption. What separates this film from others is its patience. It does not rush to revenge. It forces you to sit inside the aftermath, to feel the weight of what has been taken. And when the retaliation finally comes, it is not heroic. It is mechanical, almost empty. That is the true horror, not what happens, but how little it seems to matter once it is done. Number 13. Faster Pussycat Kill Kill, 1965. It does not ask for permission. It takes control immediately. Faster Pussycat Kill Kill opens with movement, speed, dominance. 3 women who do not follow rules. They create their own. And from that moment, the film establishes something rare for its time. Female characters who are not passive, not reactive, but aggressively in charge. Russ Meyer constructed a world that feels exaggerated, yet grounded in tension. Dialogue hits with force. Actions escalate without hesitation. Every interaction carries a sense of confrontation. There is no neutral space, no moment where control is not being challenged or asserted. The film faced backlash upon release. Critics dismissed it. Censors questioned it. Not because of explicit violence alone, but because of its tone. It presented power in a way that unsettled expectations. It blurred lines between exploitation and commentary. And audiences at the time were not ready for that combination. Quentin Tarantino has consistently praised this film as one of the purest expressions of grindhouse energy. You can see its influence in the way he writes dialogue, in the way his characters command attention through presence alone. What makes the film endure is its confidence. It never hesitates, never softens. It moves forward with an intensity that feels deliberate from start to finish. And beneath that surface is something more calculated, a challenge to traditional power dynamics that still feels sharp decades later. By the end, you are not just watching characters dominate their environment. You are watching a film that refuses to be contained by the expectations placed on it. Number 12. Dawn of the Dead, 1978. It starts like a disaster film. People running, systems collapsing, panic spreading faster than logic. But Dawn of the Dead does something unexpected. It slows everything down. It traps its characters inside a place that feels safe, a shopping mall, a symbol of comfort, of routine, of normal life. Then it begins to dismantle that illusion piece by piece. The horror is not just outside, it seeps inward. The silence between attacks becomes more unsettling than the attacks themselves. The characters are not just surviving, they are decaying emotionally, losing purpose, losing identity. George A. Romero crafted something far more subversive than audiences expected, and that is exactly why it faced censorship across multiple countries. The violence was graphic, yes, but the real issue was its message. It held a mirror to society and refused to look away. That made it uncomfortable. That made it dangerous. Quentin Tarantino has often embraced films that blend genre with commentary. This is one of the clearest examples. It uses horror as a disguise. Beneath it lies a quiet accusation about consumer culture and human behavior. By the time you realize what the film is truly saying, it is already too late. You are part of it, watching, consuming, just like the world it exposes. Number 11, Night of the Living Dead, 1968. It does not announce itself loudly, it begins quietly. Not a visit to a graveyard, a conversation that feels ordinary. Then something shifts. Something unnatural breaks through the surface of normal life. And once it does, the film never returns to safety again. Night of the Living Dead does not rely on spectacle. It relies on inevitability. What makes this film so unsettling is how grounded it feels. The characters react like real people, confused, divided, suspicious of each other. The threat outside is terrifying, but the tension inside the house becomes just as dangerous. Trust erodes quickly. Decisions fracture the group. Survival becomes a question with no clear answer. George A. Romero created something far beyond a horror film. He created a social pressure chamber. Released during a time of cultural unrest, it reflected anxieties that audiences were already feeling. That is part of why it faced censorship and backlash, not just because of its violence, but because of its ending. An ending that refuses comfort. An ending that lands like a blunt force impact. Quentin Tarantino has long respected films that break structure and expectation. This one does exactly that. It strips away heroism. It removes certainty. It leaves only consequence. By the final moments, you are not watching a story anymore. You are witnessing a collapse, and there is nothing you can do to stop it. Number 10. Suspiria, 1977. Color becomes a weapon in this film. Light itself feels unnatural. From the first frame, Suspiria pulls you into a world that does not obey logic. A dance academy becomes a place of hidden rituals. Beauty masks something ancient and cruel. And every hallway seems to lead deeper into a nightmare that refuses explanation. Dario Argento did not aim for realism. He aimed for sensation. The violence is stylized, yet disturbing. The sound design is overwhelming. The visuals feel almost hypnotic. That intensity led to heavy censorship in multiple countries. Scenes were cut. Versions were altered. Because the film does not just show horror, it immerses you in it completely. Quentin Tarantino has often gravitated toward filmmakers who treat cinema as pure experience. This film is a perfect example. It is not concerned with clarity. It is concerned with impact. Every scene is designed to disorient, to make you feel trapped inside a dream that is slowly turning hostile. What makes it endure is not the plot. It is the atmosphere. The sense that something is always wrong, even when nothing is happening. You are never allowed to relax, never allowed to understand fully. And that is the real horror. Not knowing where the danger is coming from, only knowing that it is already too close. Number 9, The Beyond, 1981. There are horror films that try to explain themselves. Then there are films that abandon logic completely. The Beyond belongs to the second category. It does not guide you. It does not reassure you. It pulls you into a space where reality feels unstable and then quietly removes every rule you thought applied. The story appears simple at first. A woman inherits a hotel, a location that carries a dark past. But the deeper the film goes, the less it behaves like a narrative. Scenes unfold like fragments of a nightmare, and characters encounter events that do not follow cause and effect. Time feels distorted, death feels casual, almost inevitable. Lucio Fulci was never interested in conventional storytelling. He wanted to create dread that could not be rationalized. That is exactly why the film was heavily censored across multiple countries, not just for its graphic imagery, but because it offers no moral structure. There is no justice, no resolution, only decay. Quentin Tarantino has often praised films that commit fully to their vision regardless of audience comfort. This is one of those films. It does not compromise. It does not soften its edges. It moves forward with a quiet confidence that makes everything more unsettling. What stays with you is the ending, a conclusion that does not resolve anything. Instead, it traps the characters in something far worse than death, a space where escape is no longer possible, where meaning itself disappears. You do not leave this film satisfied. You leave it unsettled, and that feeling lingers far longer than any single image. Number 8. The Street Fighter, 1974. Violence in most films is choreographed, clean, structured, designed to entertain. The Street Fighter rejects that entirely. From the moment it begins, it presents violence as something abrupt, something ugly, something that leaves damage behind. The central figure is not a hero. He is unpredictable, ruthless, operating by his own code, which shifts depending on the situation. That unpredictability is what gives the film its edge. You never feel safe following him. You are never sure what he will do next. And that uncertainty builds tension in every scene. The film gained notoriety quickly. It became the first to receive an X rating in the United States purely for violence. That alone positioned it as something extreme, something outside the boundaries of mainstream cinema. Many regions imposed cuts or restrictions, not because the violence was unrealistic, but because it felt too direct, too unfiltered. Quentin Tarantino has openly admired this film for its raw energy. You can see echoes of it in his approach to action. The sudden bursts, the refusal to romanticize brutality, the way tension builds before exploding without warning. What makes the film memorable is not just what happens. It is how it happens. The lack of hesitation, the absence of moral framing. Violence is not justified. It simply exists. And by the end, you realize something unsettling. The film does not ask you to agree with it. It only asks you to witness it, without distance, without comfort, without escape. Number 7. Salò, or the 120 Days of Sodom, 1975. Some films disturb you. Others challenge you. Salò, or the 120 Days of Sodom, does something far more extreme. It confronts you. It strips away the idea that cinema is meant to entertain. What remains is something cold, controlled, almost clinical in its cruelty. Set against the final days of fascist rule in Italy, the film constructs a closed environment, a system where power is absolute and unchecked. The characters are not individuals in the traditional sense. They become symbols, representations of control and submission, and that is where the discomfort begins to deepen. Pier Paolo Pasolini did not intend to create shock for its own sake. He built a framework that exposes how authority can corrupt completely when there are no consequences. The violence is not chaotic. It is structured, repeated, ritualized. That repetition is what makes it unbearable for many viewers. The film was banned in multiple countries. Some regions still restrict it heavily, not only because of its explicit content, but because of its message. It does not offer redemption. It does not provide a moral escape. It forces the audience to witness systems of abuse without interruption. Quentin Tarantino has often acknowledged films that push boundaries without compromise. This is one of the most extreme examples of that philosophy. It refuses to dilute its vision. It refuses to guide the viewer toward comfort. By the end, you are not processing a story, you are processing an experience, one that feels calculated, intentional, and deeply unsettling. And that is why it remains one of the most controversial films ever made. Number 6. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. Revenge stories often promise balance, a wrong committed, a wrong corrected. I Spit on Your Grave refuses to follow that structure in a comfortable way. It does not move quickly. It does not soften its impact. It forces you to sit inside the violation before it ever considers retaliation. That choice is what defined its reputation. The first half of the film is slow, deliberate, difficult to watch. It removes any distance between the audience and what is happening. There is no relief, no interruption, and because of that, the second half does not feel like triumph. It feels like something colder. Mir Zarchi intended to create a reaction that could not be ignored. He succeeded. The film was banned in numerous countries, seized, prosecuted, labeled as one of the most controversial releases of its era, not just for its content, but for the way it presents it without compromise. Quentin Tarantino has often defended films that challenge audiences directly. This is one of the most divisive examples. It forces a question. What does justice look like when it becomes indistinguishable from brutality? What makes the film endure is not its shock value. It is the discomfort it leaves behind. There is no clean resolution, no emotional release that feels complete, only a lingering sense that something irreversible has taken place. And that is what separates it from conventional revenge cinema. It does not restore balance. It exposes how fragile the idea of balance really is. Number 5. Cannibal Holocaust, 1980. There are films that simulate realism. Then there are films that blur the line so completely it becomes difficult to separate fiction from reality. Cannibal Holocaust does exactly that. It presents itself as recovered footage, a documentary gone wrong, a record of something that was never meant to be seen again. From the beginning, there is a sense of intrusion. A crew enters a remote environment with cameras and assumptions. What unfolds is not just violence, but a slow collapse of control. The structure of the film shifts between investigation and revelation. Each layer exposes something worse than the last, and the deeper it goes, the more uncomfortable it becomes to continue watching. Ruggero Deodato pushed the format beyond what audiences had experienced at the time. The realism was so convincing that legal authorities intervened. He was accused of creating actual snuff footage. The actors had to appear in court to prove they were alive. That alone transformed the film into something infamous. It was banned across multiple countries, confiscated, removed from circulation, not only because of its graphic content, but because of what it suggested about the relationship between media and exploitation. The film does not just depict violence, it implicates the viewer in the act of consuming it. Quentin Tarantino has consistently engaged with films that challenge the boundary between audience and subject. This film takes that boundary and removes it entirely. By the end, the question is no longer what happened on screen. The question is why you kept watching. And that realization is what makes the film linger long after it ends. Number 4. Coffy, 1973. At first glance, it feels like a straightforward revenge story. A nurse takes action against the criminals destroying her community. But Coffy does not stay simple for long. It expands into something sharper, something more politically charged. A film where power structures are exposed layer by layer. Pam Grier delivers a performance that defines the entire experience. She is not positioned as a victim. She is active, strategic, calculating. And that shift in perspective is what gave the film its impact. It challenged expectations of who could occupy that role within exploitation cinema. The film did not escape controversy. Its themes of vigilantism and systemic corruption made it uncomfortable viewing in certain markets. It does not offer clean solutions. It presents a world where institutions fail, and individuals are forced to respond in ways that blur moral lines. Quentin Tarantino has repeatedly cited this film as a major influence. You can see its DNA in the characters he creates. Strong figures navigating violent systems with a sense of control that never feels absolute. What makes the film endure is its balance. It operates within the Grindhouse framework, but pushes beyond it. The action is direct, the tension is constant, but underneath it all is a commentary on power and survival. By the end, you're not just watching a story unfold, you are watching a system being challenged from within. And you are left questioning whether that system ever truly changes. Number 3. The Last House on the Left, 1972. Some films feel rough around the edges. This one feels intentionally broken. The Last House on the Left does not present itself as polished cinema. It feels raw, uneven, almost improvised at times. And that is exactly what makes it so difficult to process. The film begins with ordinary life, a simple outing, a sense of safety that seems unquestioned. Then it collapses. What follows is not structured like traditional horror. There is no distance between the audience and the violence. The camera does not look away. It stays. It observes. It forces you to remain present in moments most films would cut away from. Wes Craven created something that challenged audiences directly. He stripped away cinematic comfort and replaced it with something closer to reality. That approach led to immediate backlash. The film was banned in multiple countries, seized, edited, restricted, not because of fantasy elements, but because of how real it felt. Quentin Tarantino has often engaged with films that refuse to protect the viewer. This is one of the earliest examples of that philosophy. It does not guide your emotions. It does not offer a clear moral path. It simply presents events and allows the weight of them to settle. What lingers is not just the violence, it is the shift that follows. The transformation of ordinary people into something else entirely. A response that feels inevitable yet deeply unsettling. And by the end, you are left with a question that has no comfortable answer. When pushed far enough, what separates justice from something far darker? Number 2. Thriller, A Cruel Picture, 1973. This film does not rush. It moves with a cold, deliberate pace that feels calculated from the very first frame. Thriller, A Cruel Picture builds its world slowly. A world defined by control, by silence, by the removal of identity. The central character is not introduced as powerful. She is shaped by what happens to her. The film places her inside a system that strips away autonomy piece by piece. And instead of offering immediate escape, it allows that transformation to unfold over time. The result is something far more unsettling than a sudden shift. Bo Arnavibenius constructed the film with precision. Long stretches of quiet are interrupted by sudden bursts of violence. The contrast creates tension that never fully releases. It keeps the viewer off balance, never certain when the next moment will break. The film was heavily censored and banned in several regions. Its explicit content and unflinching presentation made it a target for authorities. But beyond that, it was the tone that disturbed audiences. It does not dramatize suffering. It presents it with a distance that feels almost indifferent. Quentin Tarantino has drawn clear inspiration from this film. You can see its influence in the structure of revenge narratives that unfold with patience rather than immediacy. By the time the film reaches its conclusion, the transformation is complete. Not just for the character, but for the viewer as well. And what remains is not satisfaction. It is a quiet unease that does not fade easily. Number 1. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. It does not feel like a film. It feels like something discovered, something you were never supposed to see. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre creates that illusion from the very beginning. The grainy texture, the distant sounds, the sense that the camera is capturing events as they unfold rather than constructing them. There is no build-up in the traditional sense. The horror arrives suddenly, without warning. And once it begins, it does not follow any familiar rhythm. Scenes feel fragmented, chaotic. Characters are thrown into situations that escalate too quickly to process. That lack of structure is what makes everything feel real. Tobe Hooper understood that suggestion could be more powerful than explicit detail. Much of what audiences remember is implied rather than shown. That restraint forced viewers to imagine what they could not see, and imagination often creates something far worse than reality. The film faced immediate backlash, banned in multiple countries, pulled from distribution, not because of excessive gore, but because of its intensity, its ability to create sustained fear without relief. It did not feel like entertainment. It felt like exposure to something raw and uncontrolled. Quentin Tarantino has often praised films that maintain tension without compromise. This is one of the clearest examples. It never breaks tone. It never reassures the viewer. It moves forward with a relentless energy that leaves no space for comfort. By the end, there is no resolution, no sense of safety returning, only exhaustion, only the lingering feeling that what you witnessed could exist beyond the screen. And that is what makes it unforgettable, not what it shows, but how real it feels when it refuses to let you go. These films were buried for a reason. They unsettled audiences. They crossed lines others refused to approach, yet time has transformed them into legends. If you made it this far, you have seen what most never dared to watch. Now the question remains, which one stayed with you the longest?